God doesn't run from the fight when we run to him. Grace and peace, everybody. Defender and deliverer. Looking here in the book of Psalms for an understanding of how God hears and how he delivers us. We're going to see how God fights our battles, remembering, though, where we are in position to him. We talked about that in the last study. If you haven't watched that, go back and catch that to get the full meal. But even if you don't, even if not, I know God's going to feed us here with some faith right now. But before we get into it, I want to remind you, thank you again for watching. Please subscribe to this channel at Change Ministry. But finally, please like the video. That makes it easier for others to find it. So let's get to it. The Bible has been written by people that live everyday lives. And it's interesting that the individual who primarily has written the Psalms is David. And David was a man of war. That was his calling. That's why God used him in the life of Israel. So the ministry for himself and for his people. But if we understand that he's a man of war, it helps us to really get into the mindset now of recognizing how in the warfare of life, we can adopt these Psalms just like he did in literal warfare. See, in Psalm 35, verse 1 to 2, it says, this is a Psalm of David, where he is praying, plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me. Fight against them that fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler and stand up for mine help. Now, remember, we talked about the analogy of running to the safe base. And when we're on base, we can't get tagged out. We can't be touched by the enemy. But now we want to build on that thought to where when we run to God and when we go to him for deliverance, it's not just that he's put these feathers around us to hide us. It's not just that he's promised to allow the plague or the terror to not befall us, but God also fights our enemies while fencing his believers. That's why David says, I'm coming to you and I'm asking you, the war doesn't end. I need you to fight for me. Fight against those who are fighting against me. Now, this is bold talk. And David could only say something like this if he knew he was on God's side. He wasn't trying to co-opt and get God to co-sign his will. But because he was trying to practice and trying to participate in God's will, he could lean on God's work, God's power. So when you see in Psalm 43 in verses 1 to 2, he goes back to praying, judge me, O God, and plead my cause against an ungodly nation. Oh, deliver me from the deceitful and unjust man, for thou art the God of my strength. You're my strength. Why dost thou cast me off? Why go I mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? Ask yourself that question. Are you going about mourning because of the oppression of the enemy because you've forgotten who you belong to? And maybe you're beyond just forgetting. Maybe we've actually forsaken, but we've tried to take on or tried to fight this war. Or even we can get to a point, and the enemy can do this, to where we actually start fighting against God. We're so far from him. We see his hand of help as a hand of holding back. We got the four-letter words mixed up. We think that God's law is about limits when we forget that God's law is about loving us. It's very much possible to get deceived and get twisted up this way. But regardless, David is assuring us that God can plead our cause. We go to him as judge, not just to be the judge of our soul, to vindicate our cause, but even to be a judge against those who are outside of his will. That's why we got to make sure that we're running to God. And if we are, we can assure ourselves that God will fight for us in our running. One more verse there in Psalm 119, 153 to 154 says, Resh, consider mine affliction and deliver me, for I do not forget thy law. Plead my cause and deliver me. Quicken me according to thy word. We wrap up on this because regardless of what side we end on, God wants to defend his creation. See, in the first verse in 153, where he says, consider mine affliction because I'm doing what you've asked me to do. And some of us can stand on that. When you know you're doing what God has asked you to do, you can stand on his word and say, God, now I need you to do your work. But what about that last verse? 154 says, I need you to do the exact same thing, plead my cause and deliver me according to thy word. So even if you find yourself opposing God, we find ourselves outside of God. And like the prodigal son, we come into ourselves, which is really the work of God, the Spirit of God working in our hearts to convict us. When we recognize that, wait a minute, I'm on the wrong side. I can't look back and lean on my record. Now I got to lean on Christ's righteousness. Deliver me according to what you said you would do. Not based on what I'm doing. You could be going sideways, doing wrong, going backwards. But when you hear that voice saying, come this way, come home, come unto me, that's when you can now fall on his word and say, now, I know I don't deserve it, but according to your word, fight my battles. I know I'm in a mess, but I need you to turn this mess into a message. I need you to fix exactly where I've fallen. That's what we can do. So whether you're praying according to what you've done, and even if you're praying according or because of what you've done, right or wrong, ask for God's deliverance. Claim his deliverance, whether it's according to his law. But like most of us, when you mess up, you can even pray it according to his word.